This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Susie Guerin. Brought to you in part by
TheStreet.com. Up-to-the-minute stock market news and in-depth analysis. Our Quant Ratings service provides objective, independent ratings daily on over 4,300 stocks. Learn more at TheStreet.com/NBR.
Cleared for takeoff, American and U.S. Airways settle antitrust charges and will merge to become the world's largest airline. How the deal affects investors, flyers, and what you pay for a seat.
Heart Healthy, new guidelines tonight from the American Heart Association on the use of statins to fight high cholesterol. Will it be a game changer for the makers of the drugs?
Happy holidays ahead. The retail industry's biggest names report earnings over the next couple of weeks, providing investors with a look at the strength of the consumer. All that and more on Nightly Business Report for Tuesday, November 12th. Good evening, everybody. I'm Sue Herrera in tonight for Susie Guerin.
And I'm Tyler Matheson. Welcome, everybody. Well, the world's biggest airline is about to take off. The Justice Department settled antitrust charges, clearing the way for the planned merger of American Airlines and U.S. Airways, but not before wresting some concessions aimed at protecting the consumer and making sure the new airline won't be too big. Investors did welcome the news. Shares of U.S. Airways ended about 1% higher. Shares of American Airlines, which began trading on an alternate exchange after it went into bankruptcy, shot up a whopping 26%. Let's take a look now at what the changes may be in store at the combined airlines and what it means for travelers and investors.
With more than 6,700 flights a day, the new American Airlines will be the world's largest. But both partners must pay a price. To get the $16 billion deal done and settle antitrust charges brought by the Justice Department, both American and U.S. Airways will give up takeoff and landing slots and gates at 7 congested big city airports, such as Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, and Washington, D.C. Some of the more noticeable changes will be in the nation's capital, where the new American will operate 44 fewer departures a day than the two partners currently have, giving up 104 takeoff and landing slots. 16 of those slots will be offered to JetBlue. The 88 others will be distributed to other airlines. At New York's LaGuardia Airport, they'll give up 34 takeoff and landing slots and 5 gates. Assistant Attorney General Bill Baer of the DOJ's Antitrust Division said the settlement will, quote, disrupt the cozy relationships among the legacy carriers, increase access to congested airports, and provide consumers with more choices. Why was the DOJ so wary of an American-U.S. Airways merger? Well, for one thing, it will be the 4th big airline merger in the past 5 years. And once the deal closes next month, the nation's 4 largest airlines will control roughly 85% of all domestic airline seats.
And joining us now to talk more about the airline industry is Helene Becker. She's an airline analyst with Cowen Securities. Good to see you, Helene. Welcome. Let's start, first of all,
thank you very much for having me,
with who the big winner is in all of this. Is it the larger carriers, because now they have access to new gates, or is it the smaller carriers because they have access to new gates?
Well, of course, U.S. Airways and American are going to have to sell those gates, and they'll go to auction, and the slots at LaGuardia and DCA specifically. So it'll go to auction, and the highest bidder will be the winner. You know, if Southwest and JetBlue, which are operating some of those slots now, if they choose not to bid, of course, anybody else can bid.
What is going to happen to fares as a result of this, Helene?
You know, I think that's a really good question. On balance, over the last couple of years, we've seen costs really increase. But that said, and as a result, fares have gone up with it. And we expect that fares are likely to go up because we think costs are going up. And I think that's really the way to think about that. Now, having said that, we expect that the slots and the gates that'll be divested will encourage other participants to come into the market. We know, for example, JetBlue is already expanding in Boston. We expect them to continue, and obviously that will help consumers in terms of giving them more choices.
Are most of the mergers in the airline industry behind us? It seems as though we've seen so many. Are there any left out there that seem logical to you?
Right, I think not. I mean, that doesn't mean after a few years there won't be others. This is the second time in my career that I've seen major technology improvements in aircraft and a major consolidation cycle. The last time we were talking about the top 10 airlines controlling 85% of the industry's capacity. Now we're saying the top 4. So I don't think there's a lot left to consolidate.
You know, I was looking at a list of the best performing S&P 500 stocks, and I believe Delta was on it. Is there any particular stock in this sector that you are more high on than others?
Well, I guess no pun intended there, right? But because the airlines have been really high-flying stocks all year long. I mean, we really like Delta. That's been a top pick of ours all year. We like United. That's been another one. Spirit. I mean, we've been pretty overweight on the group all year long, primarily because we're encouraged by the fact that airlines are focused on returning capital to shareholders. They're focused on limiting capacity growth, limiting capital spending. So, we're pretty optimistic about the group. And as I said, we think that technology improvements in the aircraft will be hugely beneficial, and so will consolidation. So we're looking at the industry being able to report profits in 2014 as well as 2013.
All right. Thank you so much, Helene, for joining us tonight. Helene Becker, airline analyst with Quant Securities.
Well, stocks ended mostly lower today, but not by much, with some blaming mixed messages from Federal Reserve officials. Traders got spooked early on after one Fed president said the central bank's stimulus program can't go on forever. Later, another said he could see tapering begin in March. And then a third Fed bank president said that the central bank's monetary easing plans should remain in place. The Dow backing away from Monday's record close. It was off 32 points. The Nasdaq ended a fraction of a point higher, and the S&P was down 4. Treasury prices were under pressure today on fears about the Fed tapering its stimulus program. The yield on the benchmark 10-year note fell slightly to finish at 2.77%, and crude prices fell more than $2 a barrel, closing at the lowest level since the end of May.
Well, despite today's dip, the Dow is up more than 20% this year. But Ray Dalio, the founder of the hedge fund Bridgewater Associates, has a much more bleak outlook on equities for the decade ahead. At today's New York Times Deal Book Conference, Dalio said that as stock prices continue to rise, expected future returns will head lower.
I think over the next 10 years, equities will have about a 4% return. As you lower the expected return and you do not lower the expected risk of equities, then increasingly there is a movement more to cash. So as you have a greater appreciation in the price because of that, you have less wealth effect, and each increment of wealth effect has less impact on spending. Federal Reserve will not be able to raise interest rates for a number of years.
Dalio advised investors to create a proper balance between stocks, bonds, and cash on account of the narrowing return rates on each investment.
Walmart wants to get a jump on this year's Black Friday bargain hunters. The world's largest retailer will open its doors at 6 p.m. local time on Thanksgiving evening this year. That's 2 hours earlier than it did last year. It's also offering some exclusive Black Friday deals at Walmart.com, and those begin early on Thanksgiving morning.
And Walmart is among some of the nation's biggest retailers reporting their latest quarterly earnings this week, and more importantly, giving investors their outlook on the all-important holiday shopping period. Courtney Reagan has more.
It's been a tough few quarters for retailers, with traffic down in shopping malls and lackluster sales. Investors are wondering how much pressure the government shutdown and new healthcare laws are adding to consumer spending, and how much falling gas prices are helping. As a flurry of retailers report earnings in the coming days, Wall Street will find out. But while investors want to know how the back-to-school third quarter ultimately turned out, that's in the past. Holiday hopes are hanging on those all-important fourth quarter forecasts.
We're very concerned about what they'll all say about the fourth quarter. We're not so concerned about what they report in the third quarter, especially if they say something like, It strengthened every month of the third quarter.
First out of the gate will be Macy's, reporting its earnings before the opening bell tomorrow. The department store disappointed last quarter, though it suggested the sales weakness was only temporary. Many analysts believe the magic of Macy's will again surface this holiday season. The world's largest retailer reports early Thursday, and like usual, what Walmart says will send ripple effects throughout the market. A lot is weighing on whether the Dow component will post a third straight disappointing quarter, or if the weakness is past. Though not everyone thinks Walmart's outlook will set up a coal in the stocking holiday season.
My anticipation is that sales have been pretty good at Walmart for the last 3 weeks, the last 2 weeks of October and the first week of November. If that's true, I think they're likely to be less guarded on their commentary.
While Walmart will set an early tone, retail earnings really heat up next week with closely watched and widely held names reporting, including Best Buy, Home Depot, JCPenney, and TJX. So the big question remains, will the results be naughty or nice? For Nightly Business Report, I'm Courtney Reagan.
And still ahead, new guidelines from the nation's leading heart organization could reshape how cholesterol-lowering statins are used. But what does this mean for the drug companies that make them? A big setback for a promising medication aimed at treating heart disease. GlaxoSmithKline's drug failed in a late-stage trial to produce a significant reduction in heart attacks, strokes, or death when added to a patient's care, which may include a cholesterol treatment, aspirin, or even blood pressure medications. Shares of Glaxo fell more than 1.5% today.
Some new recommendations out tonight affecting millions of Americans currently at risk for serious medical conditions, and the guidelines center around statins. What will that mean to the health of some of the nation's biggest drug makers? Well, Hampton Pearson has that story.
The new guidelines from the American Heart Association focus on the use of statins, not just to control cholesterol levels, but to lower the risk of heart attack, strokes, and diabetes.
Well, this is certainly a departure from prior guidelines where the focus was really on trying to get your cholesterol to goal, and now the focus is really on just trying to get started on medication and take the highest dose that you can tolerate.
The Heart Association and American College of Cardiology identify 4 major patient groups for whom taking statins lowers risk. Patients with cardiovascular disease, those with high LDL or bad cholesterol levels, patients with type 2 diabetes, and patients between 40 and 75 years of age with a 10-year high-risk cardiovascular profile.
The new recommendations really reaffirm the importance of treating cholesterol levels in our highest risk populations, those with established heart disease, those with diabetes, and those who have genetic cholesterol problems.
Analysts say there's no question statins are the big gorilla in the cholesterol-fighting prescription drug market. 214 million prescriptions a year, a 17% increase just in the last 5 years. But 2 of the biggest sellers, Pfizer's Lipitor and Merck's Zocor, have now gone off patent. AstraZeneca's Crestor will go generic in 2016. Even if the new guidelines lead to more people taking statins, analysts say it won't offset the lost revenues from those expiring patents.
It's really going to benefit just the generic market, and at that point in the generic life cycle really doesn't even help the generic firms because it's really a commoditized product.
The next generation of patented statins is in the pipeline. Meanwhile, doctors emphasize drugs are no substitute for a heart-healthy lifestyle that includes a good diet, exercise, and a lot less stress where possible. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Hampton Pearson in Washington.
And here to talk more about the new cholesterol treatment guidelines and what they mean for investors is Barbara Ryan. She's a managing director with FTI Consulting. Barbara, you presumably heard that package that Hampton just filed for us. Do you have anything you take issue with there, or do you think this is really not a needle mover for the drug companies?
It's absolutely not. I mean, I think as was mentioned, given the fact that both Lipitor and Zocor have lost patent protection, they are mere shadows of their former selves and not financially relevant to Merck and Pfizer. I think there may be more increased attention on obviously products like Vytorin from Merck and Zetia, as well as Crestor, which were mentioned. But since their patents go off in 2016, there too investors are not going to get too excited. We do have new drugs coming from down the pipeline, one in phase 3. Really a novel target that could be given once every several weeks from Sanofi and Regeneron is in phase 3. But I think the other message that was communicated earlier is that there's really been a movement from treat to goal and a focus on what the actual cholesterol number is, but rather that patients that are at high risk should be treated, number one, irrespective of their cholesterol levels, and two, that they should be treated aggressively with higher doses of statins, which I think that those two things are really the change here.
And does that change the guidelines, in your opinion, for other chronic diseases like diabetes, which is on the rise, and the like, or not?
Well, I think, you know, in some respects, I mean, keep in mind that the statins have been on the market for a long, long time and are fairly safe drugs. But I do think that this issue of early and aggressive treatment and prevention, you know, with good, healthy lifestyles is probably ubiquitous to a lot of chronic diseases.
Do you have any estimate, these new guidelines, as to how much the marketplace in terms of number of individuals will expand as a result of it? Are we talking about a 20% expansion, an 80% expansion? Do you have any guess?
My guess would be, you know, that maybe you're talking about 10 to 15%, and I think that would largely come from the fact that patients would be targeted for treatment sort of irrespective of what their cholesterol level is, but rather as a function of their risk for cardiovascular disease and, you know, the morbidities associated with that.
You know, it sounds as though also it's going towards the trend, which seems to be expanding quite rapidly, towards wellness, general wellness and general well-being, and intervening in your lifestyle earlier in your life so that you don't have some of these issues later on, or they aren't as extreme later on.
I think it's a great point, Sue, and I think it's absolutely true, and it's going to continue to be the case for a lot of different reasons. One is we as consumers are going to be bearing more of the burden of the cost of our health care, and so we're going to have an economic incentive as well as a health outcome incentive to do that. And the other is that I think, you know, the therapies and awareness and availability of better treatment regimens early on, you know, cancer in many areas is becoming a chronic disease rather than an acute life-threatening condition.
Barbara, thank you very much as always.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Oh, likewise.
Thanks a lot.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Barbara Ryan is Managing Director at FTI Consulting.
The largest U.S. home builder reported a big rise in sales, and that's where we begin tonight's market focus. D.R. Horton's profit increased nearly 40% in the third quarter as the company's higher closing prices boosted revenue. The home builder benefited from a pickup in home sales as mortgage rates eased just a bit in October. The stock popped almost 5% to $18.91. Dish Network added more subscribers than Wall Street expected in the third quarter, helping lift that stock. The satellite TV provider also easily beat revenue estimates. The 35,000 new Dish subscribers topped estimates, but the increase was well short of the 135,000 customers that its rival DirecTV tacked on. Didn't seem to shake investors much today. The stock jumped 6% to $50.35. And Joseph A. Bank upped its third quarter outlook thanks to a rise in sales. The retailer isn't set to report its earnings until December, but the company announced the positive outlook just 2 days before its proposed takeover bid for Men's Warehouse will expire. Shares of Joseph A. Bank rose 3.5% to $50.26.
An arbitrator says Starbucks must pay Kraft nearly $2.25 billion in damages after the coffee chain's early termination of a grocery deal. Starbucks also has to pay about $500 million in interest and attorney's fees. The decision came after the closing bell, prompting Starbucks shares to move lower initially, closing the regular session at $80.61, down just a bit. Now, Kraft shares initially popped. They finished the trading day at 51.96. The activist investor Dan Loeb disclosed he has a stake in FedEx. He did so at the New York Times' Deal Book conference today. The hedge fund titan said he met with FedEx's CEO and doesn't want to see him replaced. The news sent FedEx shares higher, even after the stock was downgraded by Cowen this morning for lack of a major near-term upside. The stock popped 1.5% to $134.63. And Leapfrog, the maker of toys and kids' tablets, was upgraded by BMO from a market perform to an outperform rating. Analysts cited the company's well-known name and leadership position in educational toys as reasons why the stock looks attractive to them. The report sent shares up a fraction to $7.97.
And tablet sales are expected to be strong this year, but tablet makers have come under fire lately for targeting those devices to young kids, who critics say are spending just too much time in front of those screens. Josh Lipton has more.
Kids are using mobile devices, including tablets, a lot more. In the past 2 years, the average amount of time children, 8 years old and younger, are spending on mobile devices has tripled, from 5 minutes a day to 15 minutes a day, according to Common Sense Media, an advocacy group. Stephanie Wissink of Piper Jaffray says it's big business.
The total toy industry size is about $20 billion, and certainly electronics and entertainment properties are a growing percentage of that, so I think it's very viable to say that this is about $1 billion market in the U.S.
Samsung is the latest tech company moving into this market. Its new Galaxy Tab 3 Kids tablet is now available in the U.S. at Amazon, Best Buy, and Toys R Us. It comes with a 7-inch display. The cost, $229. Leapfrog is also a player in the space with its LeapPad Ultra. Designed for the 4 to 9-year-old set, it has all the bells and whistles, a 7-inch display, camera, and MP3 player. Kids can also browse videos, images, and sites approved by Leapfrog. The cost, $149. Or VTech's InnoTab 3, which costs $69. But parents do have concerns about tablets, and pediatricians say they're justified. The American Academy of Pediatrics discourages screen time for kids under 2. Pediatricians I spoke to say research does suggest screen time can impact cognitive development. But despite the concerns, there's no denying this is a potentially lucrative area for tech. For older kids, pediatricians tell me parents should at least be aware of the time their kids are spending in front of screens and limit screen time to just 1 to 2 hours per day. I'm Josh Lipton, Nightly Business Report, Silicon Valley.
Hope my kids were watching that report. Coming up, Mexico quickly becoming a major hub of auto manufacturing, but will it come at the cost of American jobs?
The merger between the NYSE Euronext and the Intercontinental Exchange is now complete, and the stock of the combined company will begin trading tomorrow, thus ending the independent run of the New York Stock Exchange. The origins of the NYSE, the big board, can be traced back to May of 1792.
The president of the Philippines now says that the death toll from last week's devastating typhoon will likely be no more than 2,500, far less than the previous estimate of 10,000. Meantime, risk assessment firm Equicat estimates that total insured losses from that storm will be less than $100 million. But to be clear, that is just insured losses. Damages to uninsured homes and businesses are expected to be far greater.
With the new car sales in the U.S. climbing to their highest levels in 6 years, auto manufacturing has also revved up. Auto plants in the U.S. are now close to full capacity, so big automakers are expanding and adding more assembly lines. Not here in the U.S., but in Mexico. Phil LeBeau has the story.
It looks like any other auto plant in the world, but Nissan's new assembly lines in Aguascalientes, Mexico, represent the latest surge in North America for the Japanese automaker.
We are building a second plant, 175,000 cars a year capacity, capable of doing 4 cars. Little by little, Mexico is becoming a kind of export hub for the Americas.
Nissan's expansion is one reason why Mexico has passed Canada and is closing the gap with the U.S. for new car production.
Mexico has proven for a long time, and not just years, but for a long time for us, it's a fantastic world-class quality operation.
What's driving Mexico's auto boom? The country's central location and numerous trade agreements allow auto companies to export from there to North and South America, Europe, even Asia. But more importantly, auto workers here in Mexico make a fraction of the wage line workers earn north of the border.
Somebody in northern Mexico might be making $3 or $4 an hour in an auto plant. An auto worker in Ohio might be making 5 to 8 times more than that.
The Brookings Institute estimates half of the North American auto jobs will be in Mexico by the end of this decade. That growth may limit the expansion and hiring at U.S. auto plants. Another sign the surging Mexican auto industry is impacting lives north and south of the border. Phil LeBeau, Nightly Business Report, Aguascalientes, Mexico.
And for more on the rapidly growing auto manufacturing industry in Mexico, head to our website, nbr.com.
And finally tonight, Tuesday is not usually a popular day to say I do, but today's calendar date is 11/12/13, a highly desirable wedding day for thousands of couples. According to a study conducted by David's Bridal, more than 3,300 brides will marry today, almost 800% more than just 1 year ago. And next year, maybe even bigger. December 13th, 2014, or 12/13/14, will be the last calendar date this century with 3 sequential numbers, and it falls on a Saturday. All right, that will do it for us tonight on Nightly Business Report. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us.
And thanks from me as well. I'm Tyler Mathisen. Have a great evening, everybody, and we'll hope to see you back here tomorrow night.
Nightly Business Report has been brought to you by
TheStreet.com. Up-to-the-minute stock market news and in-depth analysis. Our Quant Ratings service provides objective, independent ratings daily on over 4,300 stocks. Learn more at TheStreet.com/NBR.
I'm Tyler Mathisen with a Nightly Business Report news brief. The world's biggest airline has been cleared for takeoff. The Justice Department gave the final okay to the proposed merger of American Airlines and U.S. Airways after demanding the new airline give up landing and takeoff slots at key U.S. airports to protect smaller carriers. Stocks ended the day mostly lower, but not by much after one Fed president said the central bank's stimulus program can't go on forever, and another said he could see tapering beginning in March. The Dow fell 32. The Nasdaq was a fraction higher. The S&P was off by 4. Oil fell more than $2 a barrel, closing at the lowest level since the end of May. And Walmart will open its doors at 6 p.m. local time on Thanksgiving Day. That's 2 hours earlier than it did last year. And tune into Nightly Business Report here on your public television station.